narrative.
The idea for this ridiculous role reversal experiment came after my wife spent an entire weekend binge-watching some feminist podcast. She burst into the garage where I was fixing our lawnmower, a task she'd been nagging me about for weeks, and announced we needed to recalibrate our relationship dynamics. I looked up from the disassembled carburetor, grease covering my hands after 3 hours of work. "What are you talking about?" "I've been thinking about how unfair our division of labor is," she declared, standing there in her pristine yoga outfit while I was covered in oil and sweat. "I propose we switch roles completely for 7 days. I'll do everything you do, and you'll do everything I do." The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, spending my Saturday fixing something that benefited our entire household, while she had been relaxing and getting enlightened by strangers on the internet. "Everything I do?" I asked, wiping my hands on a rag. "You mean my 60-hour work week managing a construction crew? The yard work? Home repairs? Car maintenance? Bill payments? Retirement planning?" She rolled her eyes. "You make it sound so dramatic." "Yes, all of it. And you'll handle my responsibilities. Cooking, some cleaning, organizing our social calendar." I almost laughed. For years I'd been shouldering the financial burden, working overtime to provide the lifestyle she enjoyed, while still handling most of the physically demanding household tasks. Meanwhile, she worked part-time at a boutique, spent liberally, and considered loading the dishwasher a major accomplishment. Instead of arguing, a different strategy formed in my mind. "You know what? Let's do it. 7 full days of role reversal, starting tomorrow. No complaints, no backing out." Her eyes widened with surprise at my quick agreement. She clearly expected resistance. "Really? You're on board just like that?" "Absolutely," I replied firmly. "But there's one condition. We commit to the full 7 days, no matter what. We need to truly experience each other's responsibilities to make this meaningful." She eagerly agreed, completely unaware of what she was signing up for. That night, I prepared everything she would need to step into my world. My work schedule, contact information for my crew foreman, upcoming project deadlines, and the maintenance issues around the house that needed addressing. Over dinner, I outlined my daily routine, including the 5 a.m. wake-up to review project plans before arriving at the construction site by 6:30. I explained the quarterly tax payment due that week and the negotiation scheduled with a difficult supplier. Her confidence began visibly wavering as I detailed the week ahead. The smug certainty from earlier was replaced with nervous glances at the calendar I'd prepared. "Don't worry," I assured her with a knowing smile. "I'm sure you'll handle it as easily as I do every day." That night, as we set our alarms, hers for 5 a.m., mine for the luxurious 7 a.m. she usually enjoyed, I felt a strange sense of anticipation. For years, my contributions had been taken for granted, my work minimized as just what husbands do. Now she'd get a first-hand education in what keeping our lives running actually required. As we turned out the lights, she murmured something about being excited to prove her point about gender roles. I simply smiled in the darkness. This experiment wasn't going to prove what she thought it would. In fact, I was counting on it revealing exactly the opposite. The alarm would ring in less than 6 hours. Day 1 of her enlightenment was about to begin, and I had a feeling by day 2, her feminist podcast heroes wouldn't seem quite so insightful anymore. Sometimes the best way to teach a lesson isn't through argument, but through experience. And she was about to get 7 days of education she never expected. Day 1 of our experiment began with the harsh blare of the alarm at 5 a.m. I opened my eyes, already wide awake from years of early rising, and watched as she fumbled to silence her phone, groaning into her pillow. "Rise and shine," I said, stretching leisurely. "Big day ahead for the new construction manager." She mumbled something unintelligible and stumbled to the bathroom. 20 minutes later, she emerged looking completely unprepared for a construction site, designer jeans and a blouse that probably cost more than my work boots. "You might want to reconsider your outfit," I suggested, still lounging in bed. The concrete pour scheduled today isn't exactly fashion-friendly. After another 15 minutes of wardrobe changes and increasing panic, she finally left wearing some of my old work clothes, looking completely out of her element. I dozed for another hour, savoring the unusual morning quiet before casually getting up at her usual wake time. I made myself a proper breakfast, something I rarely had time for, and then surveyed the house. According to our agreement, today I would handle her responsibilities. I started with the dishes from the previous night, then threw in a load of laundry and spent 30 minutes cleaning the kitchen and living room. By 9:30 a.m., I'd completed what she would normally consider a full day's work. With hours to spare, I decided to handle some household tasks she'd been putting off for months, organizing the pantry, fixing the squeaky closet door, and replacing the burned-out light fixtures in the hallway. Around noon, my phone rang. It was my assistant foreman. "Hey boss, is your wife serious about this role swap thing? She's been sitting in your truck for the past hour making calls after she tried to explain the foundation inspection to the city inspector." I suppressed a laugh. "Tell her to put you in charge of the inspection and just observe." Shortly after, she called, her voice tight with stress. "These people don't listen to anything I say. The inspector asked technical questions I couldn't answer, and your crew keeps checking with each other instead of following my instructions." "Welcome to my Monday," I replied calmly. "Remember when you told me anyone could do what I do with minimal training? Maybe reconsider that position." "This isn't fair," she snapped. "You've been doing this job for years. And yesterday you claimed it wasn't particularly difficult or valuable," I interrupted. "Are you calling to quit our experiment on day one?" There was a pause. Her pride wouldn't let her concede so quickly. "No," she finally answered. "I made a commitment." "Good. The concrete delivery is at 2 p.m. Make sure the forms are properly braced before they pour." I hung up and turned my attention to preparing an elaborate dinner, far more complex than anything she typically made. I even had time to bake fresh bread, something she'd always claimed was too time-consuming for her schedule. At 7 p.m., I heard her car in the driveway. She trudged through the door looking utterly defeated, clothes stained with concrete, hair disheveled, and an expression of exhaustion I recognized all too well. It was the look I wore most nights, though she rarely noticed. "Dinner's ready," I announced cheerfully from the kitchen. "I've prepared cocoa vin with fresh sourdough and a side salad." She stared at the immaculate kitchen, then at me, then at the gourmet meal laid out on our usually cluttered dining table. "How did you have time for all this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, I finished your daily tasks by mid-morning," I replied casually. "So I had plenty of time to deep clean the house, fix a few things, organize our tax documents, and still make dinner from scratch. How was your day?" Instead of answering, she collapsed into a chair and reached for the wine bottle. After a long drink straight from the glass, she finally spoke. "One of your clients threatened to pull their contract because I couldn't answer basic questions about the project timeline. Your foreman had to step in and save the deal. Then I had to approve payroll having no idea who worked what hours. The concrete crew practically ignored me, and some supplier called about an order I knew nothing about." I nodded sympathetically while serving her a plate. "Sounds like a typical Monday for me. Except I usually come home to a sandwich and complaints about how you didn't have time to clean." She looked around at the spotless house, the gourmet meal, and then down at her filthy clothes. Something shifted in her expression, the first crack in her certainty. "Tomorrow will be better," I assured her, though we both knew it wouldn't be. In fact, I had deliberately scheduled one of my most challenging days for her second attempt. Day one had been a reality check. Day two would be the breaking point, and I was just getting started. Day two began much like the first, with her alarm blaring at 5 a.m. and her even more reluctant to rise than before. The soreness from yesterday's physical work had settled into her muscles overnight. I watched as she winced while pulling herself out of bed, her movements stiff and labored. "There's ibuprofen in my drawer," I offered, not unkindly. "You'll need it. The foundation inspection is today." She swallowed the pills dry, a grim determination replacing yesterday's naivety. As she dressed in more appropriate workwear this time, I noticed her checking her phone with increasing alarm. "Everything okay?" I asked, knowing full well what she was seeing. "Why are there 27 new emails from clients and suppliers since midnight?" Her voice cracked slightly. "And why is someone named Big Mike calling at 5:15 a.m.? Ah, that would be my excavation contractor. He starts early. You should call him back. He's probably having issues with the permit for today's dig." The color drained from her face as she dialed the number and stepped into the hallway. I could hear her struggling to sound authoritative while having no idea what Big Mike was talking about. After a 5-minute conversation that seemed to age her another 5 years, she returned to the bedroom. "There's some problem with an excavator permit and something about shoring requirements. He kept asking for decisions I don't know how to make. Did you tell him to proceed with the secondary plan we discussed last week? I asked innocently. What secondary plan? She nearly shouted, running her hands through her hair. Nobody told me about any secondary plan. It's in my project notes. The folder I gave you before the experiment started. Her eyes widened with panic. There were over 100 pages in that folder. Yes, I nodded. That's this week's projects. I read and memorize those details every weekend, so I'm prepared for exactly these situations. She looked at me with new eyes. Not just frustration, but the dawning realization that my job wasn't just showing up and giving orders. It was constant preparation, anticipation, and knowledge that couldn't be faked or improvised. After she left, rushing out without breakfast to handle Big Mike's crisis, I once again took my time getting started with her responsibilities. By 10 a.m., I had cleaned the entire house, prepared a slow cooker meal for dinner, and even reorganized the linen closet she'd been complaining about for months. With plenty of time to spare, I decided to tackle a few projects she'd put on the long-term to-do list, things she claimed we never had time for. By noon, I had repainted the guest bathroom, fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen, and organized the scattered family photos into albums. Around 1 p.m., my phone erupted with her panicked voice. There's an emergency at the Richardson project. The inspector failed the foundation because of some issue with the rebar spacing. The concrete trucks are already here. The crew is standing around doing nothing, and everyone's looking at me for answers. I could hear the chaos in the background, men shouting, engines running, her voice nearly breaking with stress. Put my foreman on the phone, I said calmly. After a brief conversation with him, I learned that the inspector had found legitimate issues, something that happened occasionally even to me. The difference was that I knew how to handle these situations. Let me talk to her again, I requested. When she came back on the line, I could tell she was on the verge of tears. This is a $10,000 mistake. The client is furious. Your crew is staring at me like I'm useless. I can't do this. Are you saying you want to end our experiment? I asked evenly. Yes, she practically shouted. This is impossible. I made a mistake thinking I could step into your shoes. You win, okay? Now please help me fix this mess. I paused deliberately, letting the moment sink in. Actually, our agreement was 7 days, no matter what. That was your condition, remember? Backing out on day 2 would mean admitting you can't handle what I manage every day without complaint. The line went silent except for her shaky breathing. Fine, I continued. I'll help you salvage this situation. Put me on speaker with the inspector and the foreman. 20 minutes and one technical discussion later, I had guided them through a solution that would satisfy code requirements without scrapping the entire pour. It would cost extra and delay the project, but not catastrophically. When she called again that evening to say she was finally leaving the site, her voice was hollow with exhaustion. I'll be home in 30 minutes. Please tell me dinner doesn't require any effort on my part. Everything's taken care of, I assured her. And since I had extra time, I also installed those floating shelves in the office that you've wanted for the past year, updated our insurance policies to save us $200 monthly, and scheduled that chimney cleaning you've been putting off since last winter. When she finally walked through the door 2 hours later, traffic had delayed her even further. She looked like a different person than the confident woman who had proposed this experiment 48 hours ago. She dropped her hard hat on the floor and collapsed onto the couch. Can't do 5 more days of this, she whispered, her voice breaking. Please, I'm begging you. Let's end this now. I sat beside her, maintaining my composure. Day 2 was always going to be the hardest, I said calmly. But ending now means you'll never fully understand what I handle for our family. She looked at me with genuine tears in her eyes. I understand enough. Your job is impossible. I don't know how you do it day after day. I smiled slightly. It's not impossible. It's just demanding. And I do it because that's what it takes to build the life we have. After a long silence, I offered a compromise. How about this? You don't have to go back to the construction site. But there are other aspects of my responsibilities you haven't experienced yet. We continue the experiment, but with modifications. Relief washed over her face, followed immediately by suspicion. What kind of modifications? Tomorrow, you'll handle our finances, home maintenance calls, and the meeting with our insurance agent. I'll continue with the household duties. She hesitated, clearly torn between her pride and her desperate need to escape another day like today. Fine, she finally agreed. But no more construction site. As she dragged herself to the shower, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. The construction site had been the most visible part of my responsibilities, but it wasn't even half of what I managed. The next phase of her education was about to begin, one where she'd discover just how much invisible work I did to keep our lives running smoothly. Day 2 had broken her confidence. Day 3 would open her eyes to an entirely different kind of burden. Day 3 of our experiment dawned with a change in atmosphere. No construction site for her mint number 5 a.m. alarm, but I made sure her day wouldn't be any less enlightening. When she finally emerged from the bedroom at 7:30, looking marginally more rested but still wary, I had coffee waiting and a leather portfolio on the kitchen table. "What's that?" she asked, eyeing the portfolio suspiciously. "Your agenda for today," I replied, sliding it toward her. "Our quarterly financial review, 3 maintenance appointments that need supervision, and a meeting with our insurance agent about the policy renewals." She cautiously opened the portfolio, and her eyes widened at the stack of spreadsheets, statements, and schedules inside. "First," I began, "you'll need to reconcile our accounts. I've flagged some unusual charges on your credit card that need verification. Then transfer funds to cover the property tax payment due tomorrow. It's $4,700, by the way. After that, you'll need to call about the water heater warranty." It's making that knocking sound again. Her coffee remained untouched as she flipped through the papers with increasing alarm. "Why are there so many investment statements? And what's this about a home equity line decision?" "That's our retirement planning section," I explained calmly. "We need to decide whether to increase our contributions or use that money to pay down the home equity line. The interest rate differential makes it complicated. I've been analyzing it for weeks." She looked up at me, genuine confusion in her eyes. "You've been doing all this? When? Nights? Weekends? During lunch breaks?" I shrugged. Someone has to manage our financial future. The first cracks of genuine respect appeared in her expression. This wasn't physical labor that she could dismiss as just hard work. This was complex, consequential decision-making that directly impacted our lives and future. "There's one more thing," I added, pulling a separate folder from my bag. "These are the unpaid medical bills from your mother's hospital stay last year. The insurance denied some claims, but I've been disputing them. There's an appeal hearing by phone at 2 p.m. Her hand flew to her mouth. "My mother's bills? I thought those were resolved months ago. They would have been if we'd paid the $14,000 out of pocket. Instead, I've been fighting the insurance company and making minimum payments to keep it from collections." $14,000? She repeated incredulously. "Why didn't you tell me?" I gave her a measured look. "I tried. 3 times. Each time you said you were too stressed to discuss it and asked me to just handle it. So I did." A heavy silence fell between us. For perhaps the first time, she was seeing the invisible mental load I carried. Not just physical tasks or work responsibilities, but the constant, grinding weight of financial management, planning, and problem-solving that kept our lives from unraveling. "I need to make breakfast," I said, standing up. "The plumber will be here at 9 to look at the upstairs shower leak. Make sure he gives you an actual quote, not an estimate. Last time he tried to add $300 in unexpected complications." As I prepared a simple breakfast, I could see her growing increasingly overwhelmed with the portfolio contents. When her phone rang, she jumped. "It's the bank," she said after checking the screen. "That'll be about the wire transfer for the contractor deposit. They need verbal confirmation for amounts over $5,000. The next 4 hours were a crash course in financial management. I stayed nearby, casually completing household chores while she navigated call after call, decision after decision. When the plumber arrived, I watched her struggle to understand the technical issue with our water pressure regulator, something I'd researched extensively before scheduling the appointment. "Just authorize the work," I heard her say desperately to the plumber. "Whatever needs to be done." After he left, I approached her at the kitchen table where she sat surrounded by papers and sticky notes. "Did he give you a firm quote?" I asked. "No," she admitted. "He said he couldn't know the full extent until he opened the wall." I nodded knowingly. That's how they leave room for price gouging. I never authorize work without a maximum price in writing. She looked deflated. "So I just made a mistake?" "A $1,200 mistake, potentially." but it's a learning experience. The afternoon brought no relief as she dealt with the insurance appeal call, which required detailed knowledge of medical billing codes and policy exclusions. Information I'd spent hours researching and organizing in preparation. By 4 p.m., when our insurance agent arrived for the policy review, she was completely overwhelmed. I watched as she nodded blankly while he discussed liability limits and premium options. When he asked for decisions about coverage changes, she looked at me helplessly. I usually handle this, I explained to the agent. She's learning the ropes. After he left, she closed the portfolio and pushed it away like it was radioactive. How do you keep track of all this? She asked quietly. It's endless. Every decision feels like it could be a costly mistake. That's the reality of running a household, I replied. It's not just about who does the dishes or takes out the trash. It's about who carries the mental burden of keeping everything from falling apart. She was silent for a long moment, staring at the table. You know what's extraordinary? I continued. I handle all of this plus a more than full-time job and still manage to fix things around the house. Yet somehow, I was still made to feel like I wasn't doing enough. The truth of this statement hung in the air between us. 3 days ago, she'd been confident in her assessment that our contributions were unequal, with me getting the better deal. Now, that certainty was crumbling. There's one last item for today, I said, retrieving an envelope from my desk. This is the estimate for replacing the HVAC system. It's $11,300. We need to decide whether to repair the existing unit again for $2,100 or invest in the replacement. She stared at the numbers, the magnitude of these decisions finally sinking in. How do you do this every day? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. How do you carry all this weight and never break? I looked at her steadily. Because that's what I committed to doing. That's what building a life requires. Not complaints, not keeping score, just showing up and doing what needs to be done. For the first time in our experiment, I saw a genuine regret in her eyes. Not just exhaustion or frustration, but a dawning recognition of how profoundly she had undervalued my contribution to our life together. The HVAC decision can wait until tomorrow, I said, gathering the papers. I think you've learned enough for today. As I turned to start dinner preparations, she reached out and caught my hand. I had no idea, she said simply. I really had no idea. I nodded, neither accepting her implicit apology nor rejecting it. We were only halfway through our experiment, and tomorrow would bring yet another dimension of understanding. Day 4 would be about social obligations, another arena where her perception of our roles couldn't have been more misguided. By day 5 of our experiment, the physical and mental fatigue was clearly taking its toll on her. The confident woman who had proposed this enlightening exercise was nowhere to be found. In her place was someone who moved cautiously through our home, eyeing my task lists with growing apprehension. We'd made it past the halfway point, and I had strategically saved one of the most revealing aspects of our role reversal for today: social obligations. It was time to address the invisible emotional labor she had always insisted fell unfairly on her shoulders. Over breakfast, I casually mentioned, "We're hosting dinner for my colleagues tonight." Her fork clattered against her plate. "What? Tonight? You never mentioned this." "Actually, it's been on our shared calendar for 3 weeks," I replied calmly. 6 people arriving at 7. As per our experiment, you'll be handling all the aspects I normally manage during these gatherings. "Which parts are those?" she asked cautiously. "Well, under normal circumstances, you handle the food and drinks while I manage the networking, conversation dynamics, professional relationships, and ensuring everyone's career interests are advanced through strategic interactions." I took a sip of coffee. "But tonight, we're switching. I'll make the food. You'll handle the professional dynamics." The color drained from her face. "That's not fair. You know I don't understand your work relationships." "Precisely my point," I nodded. "All this time, you've considered social hosting as merely preparing food and cleaning up. You've never acknowledged the complex professional maneuvering I handled during these simple dinner parties." She started to protest, but stopped herself, the rules of our experiment hanging in the air between us. After a moment, she squared her shoulders. "Fine. What exactly do I need to do?" I slid a folder across the table. "Here's the background on each guest, their current projects, career aspirations, and potential conflicts with others attending. The notes in red indicate sensitive topics to avoid." She flipped through pages of detailed information, her eyes widening. You prepare this much background for a dinner party? Every time, I confirmed. These aren't just social gatherings. They're career management opportunities. My project funding for next quarter depends largely on the impression we make tonight. This was perhaps the most revealing moment of our experiment so far. The realization that even our social life, which she had always considered her domain, was carefully orchestrated by me in ways she'd never bothered to notice. Pay special attention to the regional director's notes, I added. He's considering me for the expansion project, but he'll be evaluating whether I understand the political landscape before making his decision. By afternoon, I was calmly preparing an elaborate meal while she paced the house, frantically reviewing my notes and practicing conversation starters. When I suggested she change into something more professional for the evening, she disappeared into our bedroom for nearly an hour. At exactly 7 p.m., our first guests arrived. I greeted them warmly, took their coats, and guided them to the living room where she waited stiffly, clutching a glass of wine like a lifeline. What unfolded over the next 3 hours was both fascinating and vindicating to watch. While I effortlessly served course after course of perfectly timed dishes, she struggled to navigate the complex interpersonal dynamics of my professional circle. I observed as she attempted to implement my strategies, redirecting conversations away from controversial topics, highlighting accomplishments of key players, mediating between competing personalities. The breaking point came during dessert. The regional director casually mentioned a controversial policy change that divided the company leadership. All eyes turned to her, waiting for the diplomatic response I would normally provide, the one that would acknowledge all perspectives while subtly reinforcing the position that would benefit our team. Instead, she froze. "I'm not sure I have strong feelings about that particular issue," she stammered, a response that satisfied no one and potentially alienated everyone. I watched the regional director's eyebrows rise slightly, a tiny gesture I recognized as disappointment. In that moment, thousands of dollars in potential project funding likely evaporated. When our guests finally departed around 10:30 p.m., she collapsed onto the couch, emotionally exhausted in a way that physical labor could never induce. "How many of these dinners do you host per month?" she asked quietly. 2 or 3, I replied while collecting wine glasses. Plus lunch meetings, industry events, and the quarterly office parties where similar dynamics are at play. She shook her head slowly. "I always thought you were just socializing, having fun with colleagues while I did all the work behind the scenes." "The food and drinks are the easy part," I said, sitting beside her. "Managing personalities, protecting career interests, advancing professional relationships, that's the exhausting work. And I do it while remembering everyone's children's names, their spouses' occupations, and which topics might unintentionally cause offense." "I failed tonight, didn't I?" she asked, not meeting my eyes. "With the regional director?" "Yes," I admitted. "That project would have meant a significant bonus. But there will be other opportunities." The casual way I acknowledged the financial impact of her social misstep seemed to hit her harder than any criticism could have. For years, she had equated her dinner party preparations with my professional networking, never recognizing the vastly different stakes involved. "I thought I was the one carrying the social burden in our relationship," she said quietly. "But I was only seeing the surface-level tasks. That's been true of every aspect of this experiment, hasn't it?" I observed. "You've been counting hours and visible tasks, while completely missing the responsibility, pressure, and consequences that come with my roles." She nodded slowly, a new humility in her expression. "I've been unfair to you. For years." I neither agreed nor disagreed, letting the moment speak for itself. 5 days into our experiment, the transformation in her perspective was remarkable, from righteous indignation to genuine remorse. As I finished cleaning the kitchen, she remained on the couch, staring thoughtfully into space. When I finally sat down beside her, she turned to me with unexpected tears in her eyes. "How do we fix this?" she asked simply. "We're not done with our experiment," I reminded her. 2 more days." She nodded, accepting this without protest, a stark contrast to her desperate pleas to end the experiment just days earlier. "What's tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," I said, "we discuss the future. Both our future together and my career trajectory that you've never fully understood." As we headed to bed, I could see her mentally preparing for yet another revelation. What she didn't realize was that tomorrow wouldn't just be about understanding my perspective, it would be about redefining our relationship entirely. The morning of day 6 arrived with a different atmosphere. The combative energy that had characterized the beginning of our experiment had dissipated, replaced by something more reflective. I found her already awake at 6 a.m., sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, reviewing the financial documents from earlier in the week. "You're up early," I observed, pouring my own coffee. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "I keep thinking about everything I've learned this week." Instead of my usual morning routine, I sat across from her. "Today's focus is different," I explained. "It's about understanding the long-term trajectory I've been building, the one you've often criticized as prioritizing work over family." She winced at hearing her own words reflected back to her, but nodded for me to continue. I retrieved my laptop and opened a presentation I prepared months ago but never shared with her. "This is the 5-year career plan I've been developing. The regional director position I mentioned yesterday, that's step 2 in this progression." She leaned forward as I walked her through the slides. Detailed projections of increasing responsibilities, compensation structures, and strategic career moves I'd been quietly positioning myself for. The culmination was a leadership role that would nearly double our household income within 4 years. "Why haven't I seen this before?" she asked, genuinely surprised. "I tried to discuss it twice last year," I replied evenly. "Both times you said work conversations were stressful and changed the subject." She had the grace to look embarrassed. "I had no idea you were planning at this level." "That's the point," I said. "You viewed my career as a series of obligations taking me away from home. In reality, it's a carefully constructed path toward the future we've talked about wanting: financial security, early retirement, college funds fully established." I clicked to the final slide, showing the projected financial outcomes of the plan's success. Her eyes widened at the numbers. "This is what I've been working toward all those nights and weekends," I explained. "Not just meeting current obligations, but building something substantial for our future." She was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the scale of planning I'd been engaged in without her awareness or appreciation. "There's more," I continued, opening another file. "These are the 3 investment properties I've been researching. Once I reach the director level, we'll have the capital to purchase the first one. 10 years from now, the rental income alone could cover our mortgage." As the morning progressed, I walked her through layer after layer of my long-term thinking: retirement projections, asset allocations, tax optimization strategies. These weren't just abstract financial concepts, but concrete plans I'd been developing and implementing while she remained unaware. "All this time," she said finally, "I thought you were just focused on the daily grind. I had no idea you were architecting our entire future." "Because you never asked," I replied simply. "You saw the hours I put in, but not their purpose." Around noon, I suggested we take a drive. Without explaining our destination, I navigated to an upscale neighborhood across town and parked in front of an impressive home with a discreet "for sale" sign. "What are we doing here?" she asked as we walked up the driveway. "This is the house I've been working toward," I said. 3 more years of executing my career plan, and we can afford it comfortably." Her expression shifted as she peered through the windows at the soaring ceilings, gourmet kitchen, and backyard pool, all features she had mentioned wanting in our someday home. "This isn't just a fantasy," I explained. "This is mathematically achievable if I continue on my current trajectory. Every late night at the office, every weekend site visit, every networking event has been moving us toward this concrete goal." As we drove home in thoughtful silence, I could see her recalibrating her entire understanding of our marriage and my role within it. What she had perceived as my workaholism was actually purposeful, strategic advancement toward our shared dreams. Dreams she hadn't realized were actively being pursued rather than merely discussed. Back home, I prepared a simple lunch while she remained unusually quiet. When we finally sat down to eat, she looked at me with new eyes. "I've been wrong about almost everything, haven't I?" she asked softly. "I considered this before answering. You've been seeing only the surface level of our lives. The visible tasks, the hours logged, the immediate friction points. You missed the architecture beneath it all. Why didn't you make me understand this sooner?" "I tried," I replied honestly. "But you weren't ready to listen. You had a narrative about our contributions and roles that you weren't willing to question." She nodded slowly, accepting this difficult truth. So what happens now? After tomorrow, when our experiment ends? This was the moment I'd been strategically building toward all week. The conversation that would redefine our relationship going forward. Things can't go back to how they were, I said firmly. This experiment wasn't just about proving a point. It was about creating a foundation for change. What kind of change? She asked, a hint of apprehension in her voice. First, acknowledgement. I need explicit recognition of the value I bring to our partnership, not just financially, but in all the ways you've experienced this week. She nodded without hesitation. Absolutely. Second, participation. Not equality in all tasks, but awareness and appreciation of what each responsibility entails. No more dismissing my work obligations or financial decisions as less important than social calendars or household aesthetics. Again, she agreed readily. Finally, partnership. Real partnership. That means when I present career opportunities or financial strategies, you engage meaningfully. It means understanding that when I'm working late, I'm not avoiding family time. I'm investing in our future. She reached across the table and took my hand, the first genuinely warm gesture she'd initiated all week. I understand now, she said, her voice carrying a new respect I hadn't heard in years. And I want that partnership too. I just didn't realize how much I wasn't seeing. That evening, instead of separate activities, we sat together reviewing the actual household budget, investment accounts, and career projections, having the first truly collaborative financial discussion of our marriage. She asked insightful questions and offered perspectives I hadn't considered, proving she could be the partner I needed when properly engaged. As we prepared for bed on the eve of our final experiment day, there was a palpable shift in the dynamic between us. The power balance had fundamentally reset, not through argument or ultimatum, but through experiential understanding. One more day, she remarked as we turned out the lights. The most important one, I replied. Tomorrow isn't about roles or tasks. It's about establishing our new normal. In the darkness, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. This experiment, which she had initiated as a way to prove her point about gender roles and household labor, had instead become the catalyst for the most profound recalibration of our relationship since our wedding day. Day 7 wouldn't just conclude our experiment. It would begin our future. A future where my contributions were finally valued, my perspective respected, and my leadership acknowledged. Not through demanding these things, but by strategically creating a situation where she could discover their necessity for herself. Sometimes the most effective way to change a relationship isn't through conflict, but through revelation. And over the past 6 days, the revelations had been transformative.
Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.